So this is a good slide to give like a little bit of background on who I am. My name's Tommy Mulligan. I've been an organ procurement nurse at the Mayo for going on 14 years. 3 years before that, I worked for the Orlando-based organ procurement organization where I requested organ donation permission from families and managed donors and made the offers that I now get and review. Before that, I was on a cardiac ICU floor. So I've been a nurse for about 20 years. 14 of them have been here at Mayo. I'm half nurse, half logistics. So I'm one of the few that receives all the organ offers, goes through the donor, all about their history, their labs. Then I work with the surgeons, and whether it's nephrology, hepatology, cardiology, pulmonology, we take call for all organs. And then once we've accepted that we think it's a good match for you, I get you on the road. I set up planes and helicopters and transportation and call the blood bank and the OR, and I send the teams everywhere. I get to do that, luckily, remotely from home. I've got 3 monitors on my desk. I look like an organ traffic controller. That's the self-described term there. And that's basically what I do. I get all that ready, and then once I've got all that working in the background, that's when I'm going to give you guys a call 24/7. We don't get to control when the organs come, so we'll talk about that later, about how important it is to be ready to get that call at any time. Next slide, if you would. So the agenda today, I wanted to give kind of an overview. Some of these things you may have seen, heard, read. I went and tried to look for the most recent numbers that I could find yesterday on a multitude of different websites as far as transplants and what we're doing to improve the number of transplants. So we'll go over how important donation is, particularly in kidney, since that's the largest group of organs that people are waiting for. Some facts and myths about donation, so that if you have loved ones, friends, family that may not have organ donor on their card or thinking about it, you can kind of dispel some of those myths so they can get over whatever hump that is as far as being able maybe to be a future donor. Because without the donors, we can't do transplants. The actual process of being on the list and different things like that, how the list works, how you are going to show up on the list, whether or not you're going to get a call. And then once we're ready to give you a call, some tips and tricks that you may be able to have in process that will make it as expedient as possible, and so that we can take care of you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. You can skip over that one. Importance of kidney donation. So out of everyone that's on the list, and I think I'll see it on the next slide, like 110,000, give or take, 90,000 are kidney. That's a huge percentage. I think it's 85 to 87, depending on what slide you read. So every 10 minutes, somebody else is added to the waiting list. The average waiting list is about 3 to 5 years for a kidney, and that can be location specific. We'll talk a little bit about that later, like whether you live in the southeast of the United States versus the northeast of the United States. That can make a difference. That's kind of a quick overview there. Next slide. So, we know why donation is important, right? Because it's going to radically change your life, hopefully for the better. There's a lot of people with kidney disease, end-stage kidney disease. You can see there's 750,000 people in the U.S. That are living with end-stage kidney disease, and 70% of them. So that's 500,000 people that are on dialysis, pretty much. That's a lot, and it affects your lives. It affects your family's lives. It affects income, everything like that. So that's why it's kind of important for us to see what we can do about it. And transplant is definitely the best option. Next slide, please. The other thing is that dialysis is costly. If you happen to be on Medicare, it's about $100,000 a year in the U.S. to take care of a person that is on dialysis. That's just for Medicare. It's probably higher for private insurance. While you're on dialysis, and yeah, you can survive, but it's really difficult to thrive. As I'm sure most of you know, I had my first exposure on the cardiac floor as a new nurse with somebody who was lived with end-stage renal disease, and I really learned a lot from her about how it affected her personally and her family, and it really struck a chord with me. And I think that may have been one of the factors that pushed me towards transplantation and donation. Getting off of dialysis and getting a potential kidney transplant extends your life, statistically extends your life to a great degree. And that's really important. And then it also improves the quality of your life. So that's another reason. Those are costs that you can't really put in numbers on a slide. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits, we talked a little bit about that. It allows, depending on your age and your situation, it can give a large percentage of the population who were previously on dialysis to now go back into the workforce. So they can make a difference for themselves, for their family. That's really important. Overall, each year that you've been, that's okay. Each year that you've been transplanted, the costs of the kidney disease portion of your life goes down significantly. It's about the same after the first year of transplant. You can see here after 2 years of transplant, it goes down significantly. And then after every subsequent year, it keeps going down. And that was for all groups, whether you were older than 60 and whether or not you were diabetic. So those are some cost benefits of getting a transplant. And again, there's so many personal, emotional, physical, spiritual benefits of transplant that they're really hard to quantify here. Okay, next. This is one of my favorite sections, especially when I used to be what we would call a designated requester, where I would approach a family of a loved one who was in an ICU bed, who would probably been declared brain dead, who they were willing to withdraw on, and talk to them about donation. And everybody holds some type of mythos about donation and how the process goes. And that's the average layperson. There are doctors and nurses who have plenty of myths in their mind, because if you don't specialize in organ donation and transplant, you're not really going to know how it works. You're just going to make a lot of assumptions. So these are assumptions made by both doctors, nurses, and everyone else. Next slide. So a lot of people think I've been sick, I've had some type of medical illness, I'm not going to potentially be a donor. Unless you live in California, you're probably not going to get an HIV positive you're not even going to get an offer unless you were an HIV positive person. So that still is possible if you're HIV positive, but of course it would be set up to receive somebody who had the disease as well. So we wouldn't really be worried there. If you had melanoma, that's pretty aggressive cancer. We're probably not going to accept you as a donor at some point, because once we transplant you, you're going to be on anti-immune drugs, and that can increase your chances of certain cancers. So melanoma is way too aggressive. We usually don't do it there either. But you could have somebody, you could be an alcoholic, and even if your liver is shot, your lungs might be great. Your kidneys might be great. It's just the liver that's there. So any one particular disease process may not necessarily rule you out for organ donation. So it's important for friends that say, oh, they wouldn't want my stuff. Well, your stuff may be a lot better than the person on the waiting list. So don't make that assumption. We'll evaluate that. We'll make that decision for you guys. Next slide, please. If I'm in an accident and the hospital knows that I'm designated as a donor, the doctors and staff won't try to save my life. Ooh, that's a big one. That's one of the biggest ones. That's why some people won't put organ donor on their driver's license. They think that there's that we're vultures and that we're coming in and we're just caring about the potential recipients and not caring about that donor's life right there. But what's good for the potential recipients is good for the donor, and vice versa. If we don't normalize everything on that potential donor, whether it was an accident or stroke or a gunshot, it doesn't matter how you got in there to become a potential donor. We have to normalize your sodium and your potassium, and we have to make sure you have fluids and you're oxygenating and you're on the vent and your blood pressure is good, so that the organs don't actually start taking what we would call a hit, where they're being damaged. So that increases the chances of that donor coming out of whatever the accident may have been. And then, and only then, when we have done everything to try to save them, does potentially organ donation come in to take a position in the care of that donor. So if we've done everything and they can't come back, they're declared brain dead, or they're not coming back for whatever type of substantial head injury, and the family has decided to let them go, we actually have in fact made the organs hopefully as best as they can be for when it is potentially time to be a transplant. So they will not come in. The process takes a lot longer than people think. It's not like you come into the ER and then the next thing you know, where they're recovering their organs. It could take 24, 48, 72 hours before we actually get to what we call a recovery OR time. It takes time to do blood work, test for serologies, and it also takes time for transplant centers to fly wherever we're going and all come in at the same time. So that gives a lot of time for, if there was a chance for that donor to come back from their injury, for them to come back. Next, please.
It's not. 1 second. Sorry.
That's okay. My family will be charged if I donate my organs. That's not true. Up until the time that a organ procurement organization and a procurement coordinator approaches a family and they talk about making their loved one a donor, the family is responsible for any hospital stay until that point. Once a family decides that they want to make their loved one an organ donor and is caring about the potential recipients, from that moment on, the organ procurement organization takes over all of the costs. Everything in the ICU, any testing, anything from that point on is taken care of by the organ procurement organization, and they figure out their costs, like what a kidney would cost, and that gets transferred to the recipient's insurance company. They're going to pay for that. That's how the organ procurement organizations get reimbursed. They're all nonprofit, so they're not making profit off of a kidney or a lung that they sell us. Somebody's got their mic on. So that's another myth. The family will never be charged for organ donation. Next. If I'm an organ donor, I can't donate my body to science for research. You can donate your body to science after organ donation. That's a myth. One thing that I found out by actually being in the trenches years ago is that needs to be set up ahead of time. If you've already passed, whether it was a intracranial hemorrhage, it was a stroke or a heart attack, whatever it is, if you hadn't preset that up, then it's too late at that point. The process takes too long for you to actually donate your body to science at that point. Some folks, depending on the family, if they were a donor family that didn't have a lot of means, they were worried about potentially, paying for funeral costs or cremation costs. So they said, well, if we donate to science, we won't have that expenditure. But if you don't have that set up ahead of time, if that hasn't been something you've done proactively, that will preclude you. But just the fact of donation itself does not. Next slide, please. Organ donation is against my religion. Some people, you'll hear that a lot. And there are certain very small factions of folks, whether Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, that they will hold true that that's not the case. They do not want to be cut on. That's part of their personal philosophy within their peer group. But for most, it is very much considered an act of compassion. And you'll see the little quote there, and to save a life is to save the world. And you'll see that both in the Talmud and the Quran. That's something that is, you can be forgiven for being cut on if it meant that you save somebody else. And that's the typical stance there. Next. Facts and myths again. Open casket funeral is an option for people who have donated organs. Well, that's also not true. There's a lot of loving care put in by folks at the funeral home to make sure that your loved one looks presentable, if that's the case, if you wanted to have an open casket. You will not see any of the recovery scars or anything like that, even for the tissue part. They're very good about making sure that, that the last time you see your loved one, that'll be okay. One of the things that people don't realize too is that if your loved one, whether they've been a donor or not, goes to a funeral home, they are going to be cut on. Organs are going to be removed anyway, because your stomach and your GI tract will all create bacteria and gases. And if you don't, then you're not going to have an open casket. So some folks who used to be very upset that, oh, I don't want my loved one cut on to be an organ donor, but they wanted an open casket. They just didn't realize that they're going to be cut on anyway after they get to the funeral home. Next slide, please. Okay, so we got over the myths, the process of kidney donation. Let's go for it. Next slide. I like this. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So now we're going to talk about the doing. What do we do in order to try to get you guys transplanted? The waiting list. As you notice, I'm not going to read slides to you. I just am not that style of guy. you guys can read. I'll try to summarize. So UNOS controls the waiting list. There's 106 people on there, 106,000 people as of yesterday when I looked. 92,000 waiting for a kidney. So they've made a lot of changes through the years. Now, one of the changes is we're trying to match how close the kidney donor is to the kidney recipient, if possible, because kidneys can be driven. Kidneys can actually go on a commercial flight. Kidneys are a little tougher. They got a little more resilience. They can last a little longer than some of the other organs. We'll see that on a slide later. But the waiting list is where I'll get those offers and start my evaluation. And we'll see on the next slide of kind of how the waiting list works. If you would go to the next one. So organ procurement coordinators are the specially trained nurses that work for organ procurement organizations all over the country. There's 58 of them. And they'll get a call from an ICU nurse that says, we have somebody here that has been declared brain dead, is going to be declared brain dead, or a family is deciding to withdraw on somebody. So they'll show up at that donor hospital and they'll start looking through that patient's chart to see if they would be somebody who could be a good organ donor. They spend a lot of time basically being a data entry person into the system that's online. And then when they're ready to create what they call a match run, all that information, including serologies, whether you're hepatitis C positive or what your KDPI is, and we'll talk about that later, your HLA, different things that we worry about as far as rejecting kidneys. That list will be dynamic and unique. Each list that comes will be based upon the donor's age, the donor's height, just a bunch of different factors. A lot of folks will ask, well, where am I on the list? Well, that's ever dynamic and ever changing, because if you've been on dialysis a long time, yes, are you going to show up at the top of lists more often than not? Yeah, probably. But if you have what's called an antigen to one of those HLAs from a donor, and that's what we call an unacceptable one, you won't show up on that because your chances of rejecting that particular donor's kidney is high. So you won't show up on the list. Why would we put you through all that rigmarole if you're not going to be able to keep the kidney anyway? So that's all the kind of stuff that goes in the background as to them putting all the information in and then you showing up. You might be sequence 10 on one list, you might be sequence 100 on another, depending on the donor and where other people are in relation to where the donor is. So that is an ever-changing thing. We can kind of see trends. We can see when you guys are more often than not appearing at the top of lists, so that we can kind of see, this person, maybe even want to get ready for a phone call because we're seeing them more and more often. Next. So who's the best match? Who's the best match for you? And are you the best match for them? So as far as where you're ranking on there, how old you are, your blood type, your tissue typing, which is what we call your HLA, your PRA, which is basically how sensitive you are to the rest of the country. The higher your PRA, the higher the chance of you rejecting a kidney. So you're sensitized. It makes it very difficult. And some of the things that we'll talk about here in a minute is what they've done to try to make it better for those types of folks. If it's a 3-year-old donor and you're a 6 foot, 240 pound male, we're not going to take that kidney for you. It's just not big enough. So some of those things may be the case. KDPI of the donor as well. We'll talk about that on one of the next slides coming up. Next slide, please. Oh, there it is, KDPI. So KDPI stands for Kidney Donor Profile Index. What they do is they basically take all this data, age, height, race, whether or not you've had high blood pressure, diabetes, whether or not you have hepatitis C, if you are somebody who died of a stroke, all these factors come in, the donor's creatinine, and they'll assign a score to that donor's kidney from 1 to 100. I think in the 14 years that I've been here, I think I've seen maybe one or two ones. That would be like a 10-year-old who had an aneurysm that had no diabetes or hypertension. And then up to 100 means probably older, somebody with hypertension, maybe diabetes themselves, maybe with kidney function that wasn't perfect, but still could be better than yours. And we'll talk about how KDPI affects your decisions, both on the team and both for yourself, as to depending on what you guys want to take. KDPI also kind of gives us an idea of an average of how long that kidney will last. There's other factors affecting that as well. We'll talk about them too. Next slide, please. So we kind of talked about that a little bit. The computer decides what the KDPI is based upon all those factors. So just because a kidney has a higher KDPI doesn't mean the kidney's not going to work. It can work just fine. It's just that score is attributed to how long do we think that kidney, that working kidney, is going to last. So typically you're not going to put a KDPI kidney of 10 into a 74-year-old. That kind of, if that kidney could last 15 years, you'd want to put that into somebody younger so they don't have to get retransplanted. So it makes more sense if you're older for you to take a higher KDPI kidney. You're not going to live as long, or not to be, that's statistically, that's not going to happen. It does happen every once in a while based on maybe on if you were sensitized in a PRA. But what they try to do, what the system tries to do, is eliminate the number of future kidney transplants by matching appropriate donors with appropriate recipients. Is it perfect? No. Is it pretty good? Yeah, and it gets better every year. Next slide, please. Pretty much what we were just, back one if you could. Pretty much what we were talking about. So on average, and these are very rough averages, if a KDPI score is less than 85, the average life expectancy of that kidney is about 12 years. So that's an average. So there could be some 9s, there could be some 15s, there could be some 6s, there could be some 18s on that. KDPI over 85, about 6 years on average. Some of the factors that go into figuring that, or actually don't go into figuring that, is the recipient themselves. So once you get the kidney, are you taking your meds regularly? The meds, transplant, we have to remember, is not a cure. It's trading one disease process for a more reasonable or more manageable disease process. So if you take your meds regularly, if you're watching your salt and your fluid intake, if you're exercising, if you're not exposing yourself to dangerous toxins, if you're, living a pretty healthy life, you can extend that average. But if you're somebody who's not taking their meds regularly, who's not taking good care of themselves, you're going to decrease the average length of time that you have that kidney. So some of those factors are really up to us, or up to you guys, once you get that kidney. Next slide, please. So how long do people usually wait? We saw in the beginning on that one slide, 3 to 5 years. We notice, just because where we are in Florida, in the Southeast, we can be just a tad snooty on which kidneys we take. Just a tad, because our waiting list is a little less than somebody who lives in New York or Maryland or Pennsylvania with a higher concentration population. They have to wait a long time, over 5 years typically. Don't forget, the average is 3 to 5 years for the whole US. There are sections. There are plenty of people on our waiting list. There might even be a couple here that live in the Northeast, that it's better for them to fly to Florida, get transplanted here, and then either stay here or go back and get their post-transplant care taken care of back up north, because they'll get transplanted quicker by getting on a waiting list here. I've done it plenty of times over the years. You call somebody at night and say, start looking at flights for first thing in the morning. I need you to come. And then they fly here to get their transplant, because they are shaving years off of their wait time because of where they live. So the other things that affect how long you wait are whether or not you're willing to take a higher KDPI kidney, because that increases the amount of donor offers that you're going to get. And then also whether or not you're going to be willing to take a hepatitis C positive kidney. When I first started, the only people that could get a hepatitis C positive organ were liver folks who also had hepatitis C. And they had to have a certain genotype of hep C. There's genotypes 1, 2, 3, 4. That would actually tell us, probably where in the world you got your hepatitis from, believe it or not. Nowadays, we proactively treat you for hepatitis C so that if you get a hepatitis C positive organ, the chances of you getting hepatitis C are super slim. And even if you do, we have meds to control it. Hepatitis C, up until about 5 or 7 years ago, was the number one reason that people needed a liver transplant. Because of the new retroviral drugs that they use, that's not the case anymore. Now the number one reason for the need for a liver transplant is a fatty liver, because we're a heavy country. So we now take hepatitis C positive organs for lungs, hearts, kidneys, and liver. So the realm of transplant is changing because the meds that we have are so much better. It does increase or actually decrease your waiting times by being willing to take those particular organs as well. Next. So some of the other things that they've done to try to increase the amount of kidneys that we're using is they've changed the model. It used to be where if the donor was local, then statewide, then regional, and then national. And now they do it by 250-mile concentric circles. That has increased the amount of offers that we're getting. It's made it a little fairer across the board for different transplant centers. Some of the smaller transplant centers could be really remote, and they were having a hard time getting the same amount of offers that the bigger transplant centers would. So this has tried to make it fairer across the board. This helps children, people with high PRAs, and folks of different ethnicities get transplanted quicker. And we'll see, I think, on an upcoming slide that we've actually started to do more kidney transplants than ever before. Next, please. So yeah, we are up. We are up to average 70 a day. This is the highest that it's ever been. It's never been this high before, and that's because of people's willingness to take the hepatitis C positive, the higher KDPI, the geographical distance, the meds that we have, and just the assertiveness of the transplant centers to make sure that we can transplant as many people as possible. We'll probably never be able to keep up with the list because you can only do so many transplants, but we are taking a chunk out of it through a culmination of different efforts. And it's nice to see that we are getting more and more people transplanted. And I'm not sure if that actually includes, I think it includes living donors too. Next. Yep, there it is. So out of that, about 25,000, almost 20 were deceased donors. 5,800 were from living donors. Kidney pair donation, we do some of that here at Mayo. I've seen plenty where we pull a kidney, we send it to Arizona or to Minnesota, and then a kidney from there gets put on a plane and gets brought to us. That's really cool. That kind of you're circumventing, maybe it's not the right word, but if you're able to do that, that ensures that you can get transplanted earlier and you don't have to sit there and be on the list waiting for that phone call. Next. Okay. What can you guys do, or what can I help you? Like the Jerry Maguire, help me help you. This is me trying to help me help you. What can you do to get ready for the call? Next. All right. So the biggest thing is stay healthy. Stay as healthy as you can. Go to your health visits. Don't miss any of your visits. Do not miss your dialysis sessions. Exercise, comply with medical regimens, exercise regimens. If they ask you to see a dietitian or physical therapist, whether it's to get weight down or to get your mobility up, please go for it. If you're diabetic and you're prone to wounds, keep that as well taken care of as possible, because the last thing you want is to get a phone call where we have a kidney for you and you have an active infection or you have a wound that hasn't healed yet. Because we're going to put you on anti-immune drugs, we're not going to transplant you if we think that's going to increase your chances of infections post-transplant. So make sure that you're in as best shape as you can. Next. So to continue on that, as far as staying healthy, if you have any changes, please contact your pre-kidney coordinator. You don't get dinged. This way we can potentially help you take care of that if it's something serious. We call it a status 7. Maybe we status 7 you for a little bit where you're just temporarily inactive until we take that wound or that infection, or maybe your blood pressure's high, or maybe your last echo was a little abnormal. But it's better to get that taken care of beforehand versus when you come in to get your kidney and now all of a sudden we found something wrong and now we can't use it for you and we have to send you home. That is frustrating. And this is about avoiding that potential frustration. Next. Oh, is it there? You changed it. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like slides keep looking like the exact
It's
same.
okay.
All right. So tips and tricks. So when we call, be as organized as you can, right? Don't have your stuff all over. Have all your papers in a binder. Bring your normal home meds. If you're somebody who's on peritoneal dialysis, we'll ask you to bring your connectors. 99.9% chance we have the exact same connectors, but just in case there's some abnormal thing, it's good for you to just have a set of your connectors with you. Tell your transplant team about any changes to your contact information, especially your address and phone number. You'd be surprised how many times I'll call somebody and their phone is out of service or their caregiver's phone is out of service. And then I have no other way of getting in touch with you. So please make sure that's there. Please make sure if your voicemail is full, clear your voicemail, because I'm leaving you probably one of the most important voicemails you're ever going to get. And that's call me back immediately at my phone number. So I need, and then also depending on what phone you have, enable text and look for texts. I'm pretty anal. After I call you and leave you a message, I'm going to text you and ask you to call me too, in case you're screening your calls. Please have at least one contact number and preferably more. Because if I'm calling you at 2:00 in the morning and your son's your contact number, he's probably sleeping at 2:00 in the morning too. So many times I've called the backup person or the contact and I can't get a hold of them. I've done it before. I had a lady who, it was her neighbor, and literally she was smart enough to go, she said, if you get a call and I don't answer it, come and bang on my door. And that's exactly what she did. She came and she banged on her door and got her to wake up because she didn't hear her phone. The more people you have in there, the more potential numbers I have to try to get a hold of you, it increases your chances. Because kidney folks are on the waiting list on average much longer than liver and heart and lungs, you tend to forget that you're on the waiting list. You tend to forget that phone call, who you're hoping is not another telemarketer, is us. So, answer it, please. Next, and that kind of goes into the next slide. Answer all your calls. If it's an 800 number, I'll let you slide on that one. It's because that's somebody trying to sell you something, right? But especially all of the coordinators are given phones by Mayo. So when you get a call, it's not going to say Mayo Clinic. It's going to say 904. We all have a 904 exchange based in Jacksonville. So any of us that call you, it's going to come up with a 904 exchange. So those are really the ones to answer, but please answer all of them. We have a very limited time to get a hold of you because sometimes we'll get a kidney offer when the kidney is already out of the body. And that could be depending on where the kidney came from. Maybe it was originally intended to go to like a liver kidney combo recipient or a heart kidney combo recipient. And either something was wrong with that organ and then the kidney has been released back, or maybe there was something wrong with that particular recipient and they can only get the one organ, but not the kidney. So it's very time pressing. Really, I only have about 10 or 15 minutes to get a hold of you and give whoever is offering me that kidney an answer back. I know that they just made some new videos as far as like, it'll say, oh, you have an hour. That was based on the old system, that video, and it'll probably be a little bit before it gets updated. We really have only a few minutes to get a hold of you. So that's why it's so important for you to answer it on the first ring, or for you to at least check your voicemail if somebody calls you to see who it is, because it may be one of us. I've had plenty of people where I've gotten a hold of them in church, or I've gotten a hold of their family member who drove down to the church to get them. So please have your phone with you at all times and be ready to answer it. Be ready to go. Have your packed bags. Have pre-made plans for your kids and your pets. A lot of times I've called people and they go, "Oh, I got to find somebody to take care of my pets." That's not the time at 3 o'clock in the morning to find someone to take care of your pets. Do that. Please do that ahead of time. Your caregiver must be ready to go as well. We don't want you showing up alone and going through all that. So whoever that is, they need to be ready. They need to have some type of, if they're still working, some type of affiliation with their boss to let them know that they may have to leave at any time to take care of you. And again, let us know if there's any changes in infections, fevers, any of that stuff so that we can take care of it. So we talked a little bit about some of the other things that affect when you're there. When you get put on the list, and we just saw the average waiting list is 3 to 5 years, right? So you could get put on the list today. You could, depending on the donor, get a call tomorrow. And there's a couple of ways that could happen. If you're what we call a sensitized patient, you have a high CPRA, the new system is designed, if there's not an antigen on that donor that you will definitively reject, you could get put to the top of that offer. Because you're so sensitized, this would just be donor specific. You have a smaller chance of getting a kidney offer than other folks because you could reject those kidneys. But if an offer comes where the chances of you rejecting that donor's kidney is low, you move to the top just as a way to try to get you transplanted. So if you're a high PRA patient and you know that you could get a call quickly. The other way is what we call that 0 mm there on the bottom left of the page. That's called a zero mismatch offer. That means that there are no antigens whatsoever on that donor that you would reject. And if you're that person, you also go to the top of that match run, because that's the slimmest chance of someone rejecting that kidney. That makes the most sense, right? Let's put it into someone who has the least amount of chance of rejection. That's a smart use of that kidney. So that can also put you to the top of a ranking. That could be a week or two. We probably see 5 of those zero mismatches a year. That happen. They're rare. That's kind of like almost like a gift from the gods, those zero mismatch offers. And then the high PRA offers are also another gift for us trying to get you transplanted as well. So even though we tell you it's 3 to 5 years, it could be 3 weeks, it could be 3 months, it could be 18 months. That's why I want you to be ready at all times. On average, is it going to be the 2 to 3 years before you get a call? Yeah. But there are times that it could be immediate. And then folks get like, oh, my coordinator told me it would be 2 to 3 years. Yeah, that's the average. But here's the practical part is from the folks that do this particular job, we know that can also get turned on its head. Next, I think that might be, yeah. So yeah, it's this is a lot of fun. This can be a crazy, stressful job, but part of my favorite thing is calling you guys and waking you up if I have to, and getting you to come in and getting you transplanted. There are chances, what we call dry runs, where maybe we didn't like the kidney when it got home, maybe we didn't like the biopsy, and you could come in and it may not happen that day. But know that we are doing our absolute best to be as assertive as possible, but also as careful as possible to make sure you guys get transplanted. By us being ready from when we get the calls and for you guys being ready from when we call you, it just makes us a lot more efficient and increases the chances of us being able to take the best care of you. And that's it. And so I guess we can open it up to questions.
Yes, we can open the question and answer. Let me check the chat box as well. All right. Okay, how do you know your CPRA?
Okay, so your pre-kidney coordinator can give that to you. It's in your medical chart if you want to know. Usually if you're sensitized, they'll tell you. If you're not, maybe there's something that they're not mentioning. But your pre-kidney coordinator, just shoot them a note either through your portal, or however, email, whatever way you normally contact them, they can give you your CPRA. If you're a higher PRA, sometimes they'll ask you whether or not, also depending on your age, are you willing to take like those hepatitis C or those higher KDPI donors? Because you're a higher PRA, your chances are a little slimmer of getting offers. So by doing that and kind of opening the funnel for, you know what I mean, to just kind of increase the amount of offers that could get funneled through, that would be like a nice strategy you could talk to them about.
Okay. The average national wait time is 3 to 5. What is Mayo's?
That's a really good question. I don't know, but a good nurse will tell you he doesn't know and then find out the answer. So I will go and find out. I really think that we're well below the national average. That's something that I was not able to find with Mr. Google. I didn't think to look at what ours was. Now there's also something that you guys can all look up. It's called SRTR data, SRTR, and that shows you how well we do post transplant, and we are ranked as one of the best in all organs, as far as how like life expectancy post transplant, 1 year survival, 5 year survival, 10 year survival. Because we're in Florida, I think our average time is probably in the 2 to 3 year range. That's my bet, and that's a guess. Don't hold me to it.
That's your guess? Okay.
Yeah, that's my guess.
All right. The next question is, how long do you wait for a Hep C kidney?
That's hard to answer because again, where you show up on the match and if you show up on the match is based on a couple of other factors: the KDPI of that donor, whether or not you've said you'd accept a Hep C kidney, and also what they call the HLA, the tissue typing of the donor. Because if the tissue typing of the donor and your tissue typing doesn't match, you're not going to even show up on that list. I can say that if you are willing to take a Hep C kidney and you're listed for one, that you have definitely decreased your average wait time because you've increased the pool of donors that you can accept from. Because it's not that when you say you'll accept a hepatitis C positive donor, you're still getting the offers from the non-hepatitis C positive donors. You're getting offers from multiple avenues. So that is how you decrease your average length of wait time.
Okay. All right. If you have diabetes before the transplant, will you still have it after?
Yes. So diabetes is pancreas directed. So if you get a kidney, you still have that same pancreas that you've always had. So yes, diabetes is still going to be there. If you're somebody who needs a pancreas transplant, that's a different story. Or somebody who needs we do single pancreases alone. We also do kidney and pancreas combos. And those are typically with the idea to somebody who is maybe a brittle diabetic to be able to now have a new pancreas, so that that's hopefully the quote unquote more of a cure for the diabetes.
All right. And I just learned that Mayo's, and where did my message go? Okay. Mayo's wait time on average is 28.5 months. And that's per the July 2023 SRTR data.
So 2.33 years.
Okay.
Right on. I told you between 2 and 3. I'm a good guesser. I've been doing this a long time.
Okay.
A list of abbreviations. Let's see. I don't have one per se, but I could try to give one to Pat. Are they talking about are you talking about anything in particular? Like the KDPI stuff, like all the acronyms that were in there?
That's Lawrence. Lawrence, which, if you can unmute.
all the KTPIs and all them acronyms, because it seems like when we speak to our pre-transplant coordinator, I want to make sure I get them right so I can get accurate numbers. I didn't know if you had like a cheat sheet or something with those.
I don't, but it doesn't mean we couldn't create one for you. That's really a kind of a cool little idea. Depending on who I call when I make a call, I'm either Tommy from Procurement, Tommy from Mayo, Tommy from FLSL, which is like our acronym designation of the transplant center. I have to remember who I'm talking to so they know who I am. And then I know I'm talking to pilots, right? So pilots have their own acronyms. I'm talking to organ procurement coordinators that are in the ICU, and they have their own acronyms. So it can get very, I can see that. I'll look into making a little cheat sheet. That's a great idea.
Just a simple
Right.
one, so when we contact them, they
Yeah.
can, give us an idea where we stand as far as potential donors.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
All
You're
right.
welcome.
The next question, do you need to bring your dialysis machine or just the connectors?
Yeah, just the connectors.
All right. Right. I have PKD and kidneys are very large. Would a donor have a large size or what would be normal for me?
Okay. So if you have PKD, obviously we're not going to try to take a very depending on your size, we're not going to take somebody who's overly small. There's a lot of space there that's been created by that, or it's taking up a lot of space. Your PKD. So one of the things we haven't talked about, and hopefully you guys have talked about that with surgeons, is that typically when we implant the kidney, we don't remove the native kidneys; they stay, and this gets basically kind of like in a pocket to the right of your groin, like in your hip area, and then they just reroute the plumbing, and they take what was connected to your old kidney and connect it to the new kidney. Also, if you have a relative donating a kidney that's not the same blood type, what is the wait time? If that's a living donor situation, that's a little bit of out of my purview as far as the wait time goes. I'm assuming that relative who's donating, who's not a compatible blood type, would be donating to someone else, and then we'd have to wait for that someone, whoever that someone else is, their donor to go to you. I know that living donors wait time is much less than a deceased donor wait time. As far as that would be a question more, I would think, more directed towards the living donor coordinators.
Okay.
They definitely have much more knowledge in that area than I do.
Okay. Is there a way to know that you are next or closer?
Not directly. Like I said, we can kind of get an idea because we're the ones that are getting offers. We can get 30 or 40 offers a day between heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys. And we can kind of see a trend. It's hard for your pre-kidney coordinators to know. Every once in a while, we'll have like little meetings with them, say, hey, we've seen like these 6 or 7 people on a lot of offers lately. So these may be good folks to give a call, make sure everything's kind of in line. And I know they started doing that about a year or two ago. So if you're, more than likely, you'll get a call. Doesn't mean you're not going to get bumped up in one of the matches. More than likely, if we see your name often, you're going to get a call to make sure everything's copacetic with you, because we have an idea that you're going to get transplanted sooner than later. But there's really hard, like I said, each list is dynamic and can change based on the donor's information. Your ranking can be 3 one time and 23 the other, in the same day, depending on if it's 2 different offers, where it comes from, the age of the donor, all those other factors we discussed. So it's hard to tell you exactly where you are. If you've been waiting a longer period of time, then statistically you're closer, right? If you've only been waiting for 3 months versus somebody who's been waiting for 3 years, that 3-year person statistically would be closer than you might be.
Right. If you are getting more than one organ, how does that change your timeline?
That's a great question. That is also really hard to say. So if I'm assuming, and this is just an assumption, if they're asking that question, it's more than likely, if you're in this group, it's a kidney pancreas. I don't know. Pancreases happen to be the most temperamental organ. And the only organ that doesn't have its own little device these days. So there's a special heart device that we can put the heart on and pump it and tweak it. Same thing with lungs. There's a special device for livers. And then we also have kidney pumps. Pancreas doesn't have anything
It's going to
like
be
that.
a kidney and liver.
A liver and kidney. Okay. So that the liver kidney combo is not actually going to be affected by the kidney offers. It's going to be controlled by the liver. The liver is the master and the kidney is the slave in that situation. So your MELD score is going to drive where you are on the list, not your kidney score or your dialysis score. So if the donor has a higher KDPI and it's a liver kidney combo, we're a little bit more particular. So we're a little bit more discerning on the donors for a liver kidney combo. If you have a high PRA, that usually is not as affected as much, because believe it or not, because the liver and the kidney comes from the same donor, we put the liver in first, right? Put the liver in first. You open up the pipes and the blood flows through the liver. Now your body sees that there's a new organ in there, it recognizes that there's a new organ in there. It doesn't kind of attack it as much as it would a kidney. Once we put the kidney in and we open the valves kind of to the kidney and the blood flows, the body goes, oh, there's a strange kidney in here. And the normal stuff that it creates to kind of go after this stranger, the first thing it does is that signal and all those antigens go to the liver, because that's our filter. And the liver goes, oh, I know this guy. He came with me. He's cool. You don't gotta bother him. You don't gotta attack him. He's mine. It's like the +1. The liver came, he had the invite, he had a +1 invite, he bring the kidney with him. So we can put the liver kidney combos into folks. So really that's going to be directed more towards by your MELD score and where you are in the ranking of that, if that helps.
Okay. What blood types are the most compatible?
So if you're a B, you can kind of get almost anything, right? Or even an AB, you can kind of get most anything. An O can donate to anybody. So you could potentially, if you're an A or an AB or a B, you can get an O donor. Some of that might matter. If you're a B, we can do it. There's a designation called A2, where you could actually get an A2 donor. We have to test for what's called an isoglutenin titer, and there's a couple of other hoops that we might have to jump through. So if you're a B and we have an A2 donor, you have to come in and get tested before transplant. And if your value is too high, we might not be able to use it. So there's the chance of a dry run there. O's and A's tend to go quick. But every once in a while, like I said, those B's could surprise if you have a zero mismatch. Because the list is smaller, you could get transplanted earlier. It just depends on, you might see O's all week. Like, well, I haven't seen any A's or any B offers. Why? Because that's just the way the stats went that week. But overall, O's and A's tend to get the most offers, but B's can catch up because they're a smaller list.
Okay. Can you run through a basic script of what you say on the call?
Absolutely. So I'll ask you if you've had any fevers, infections, or COVID-like symptoms lately. Any wounds? Are you on any antibiotics? Have you gotten any recent blood products? Because that could change what your CPRA score is. How far away are you? Are you ready to go? Is your caregiver ready to go? And then I'll tell you where to go. So this way everybody knows transplants happen 24/7. We have absolutely no control of when they come, because that is all going to be donor hospital derived, donor family derived, and when the transplant centers can fly there and recover the organs. You're always going to go to the ER since they're open 24/7. Even if it's Wednesday at 2 p.m., you're going to the ER because it's just the same every time. And that's for all organs. There's a little garage right next to the ER that you can park in when you first get there. You can move the car later once you're admitted and checked in. You walk into the ER, you tell them you're there for your transplant. There's an automatic process. They'll send you for a quick chest x-ray to make sure you don't have pneumonia. Then we'll bring you up to the floor. We'll steal some blood from you for a cross match. And then we'll keep relaying to the bedside nurses and the charge nurses on the floor when we think the kidney's arriving, and then whether or not we like it when it finally does come in.
Okay. So if you've done a paired donation without your donor being a match, are you considered for all kidneys, or do you wait for a paired match? Tommy, did you catch?
Hey, I'm processing. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm reading the question and I'm trying to make sure I understand it and can answer it as best to my knowledge. Again, I don't want to say wrong. That's more of a living donor question.
Okay.
Are you can consider for all kidneys, or do you wait for a paired match? So you could be working on a paired donation and also be willing to accept the deceased donor offers. Okay. You don't have to wait for that. If I called you and if you were active on the list, you say, well, I do have, my brother's going to donate, or I'm in with a paired donation. You have the choice to say, you know what, I'm going to take the offer now because I want to be transplanted now. And I don't want to, maybe I don't have to put my brother through this donation process. You always have the chance to say yes to the deceased donor kidney. It's hard to say. I would assume, and it's just the way it's worded. Yes, you're gonna be in line for that paired match when they find the right one. But if you're active on the list, you could be being offered all kidneys as well. Hopefully that.
Tommy, can I clarify that? Because I actually got a call from you about 2 weeks ago. My son donated for me about 2.5 months ago.
Okay.
Are you typically calling paired matches, or is it like the kidney came up? I think I was like back up on the list or something, and you were like, I'll call you between 12 and 2 tonight, and you need to be ready to go.
Sure.
I don't know if you remember that or not. It was like 2 weeks ago.
I think I do. So if you're still active on the list, because that's kind of not, I hate to say it that way, it's not our realm. Like if you're active on the list and I get an offer for you, it's kind of like automatic that I'm going to call you.
Okay.
That's when most of the time us as a procurement coordinator find out that you either have a living donor and you're in paired donation. Because we really do have a limited amount of time. If I had all this time, I could go through your chart and see that you've got something lined up, maybe got a living donor lined up or a paired donation lined up. But we still like to be able to give you the offer, because if we've got an offer for you today and you don't know when your paired donation is going to happen, we want to be able to give you that choice to say.
Well, and that's the thing. With paired donation, my son already gave his kidney 2.5 months ago. It just didn't, unfortunately, come to me. And whoever he donated it to, their donor isn't a match for me. So they took his kidney, and now I'm just waiting for my match. So that's what I was trying to understand. If you called me, does that mean that you had a match? And
no,
you're saying that
we're not going to call you, Rachel. If you're getting a call from one of the procurement coordinators, it's not about a paired match. It's about a deceased donor kidney only. So you're allowed to. Question. Yeah, you're allowed to. If you want to continue to receive those calls, then just don't do anything. You're going to continue to receive them. If you want to wait for your paired match, you could tell your coordinator, I just want to wait for my paired match. Temporarily inactivate me on the deceased donor call, so when I get a call, it's only for a paired match. Otherwise, you'll get a call potentially from both.
Okay, perfect. That's what I needed to know. Thank you, Tommy.
You got it.
Right. Someone wanted to know about O positive matches.
Okay, it's kind of a generalized. So really, they all run the same.
I'm sorry. If I'm O positive, how easy is my matches?
What's that?
Wants to know how easy are matches for O positive for the recipient.
How easy are matches? Really, they're no easier for one blood type or the other. It's really just a question of the donor, and does the donor profile and the donor's HLA and the donor's KDPI and the donor's hepatitis C and all those things, do they match what you've chosen to be as far as accepting those donors? It has to do with your wait time, how long you've been on dialysis. A lot of those things can reflect of where you are positioned on the offer. So one blood type or another doesn't really change too much of where you're positioned on that offer. It's going to be more specific to the tissue typing of the donor, the age, how they died, all those types of things are really what determine whether or not you're there. In a given week or two, could there be a lot more O donors? And could you increase your chances for that short period of time? Sure. But on the average, they all average out as to about how many offers are in O or in A or in B. They tend to be consistent if you look at them over enough period of time. It's hard to give a definitive answer just based on blood type, because there's so many factors in there that it is only a small percentage of where you're going to be on that offer.
Janine, can you expand upon your question and be a little more specific?
I think I can read that one. How far can you travel from Mayo? Stay local, stay in the U.S., or travel out of the country?
Country.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what she meant, country. So really, it's about how quick can you get back?
Yeah.
And where are we in the process? If you got family in New York and you're visiting them, and I got an offer for a kidney that's already been out of the body for 6 to 8 hours, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and you can't get on a commercial flight till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you may have just missed your window, because that's going to be too much time on the kidney. So if you do travel outside the state, the U.S., or the country, definitely let your pre-kidney coordinator know. It really might behoove you just to be temporarily inactive while you're on that trip and come back. Because we do have a limited time. Not only do I have a limited time offer to get a hold of you, there's a limited amount of time for you to get there, to get to us. Depending on where the offer is, we can't control when the kidney comes. Sometimes we get the kidney offer and we know it's coming to us before they even go to the donor OR. But that's not always the case. Sometimes, depending on the people that are ahead of us, maybe they got a different offer. Maybe they bring that person in and they were COVID positive. Maybe they bring that person in and they had an abnormal echo. So a kidney that we didn't think was coming to us, because we were at sequence 30, now all of a sudden it's coming to us, but it's already been out of the body for 8 hours. So the closer you are to Mayo, the better the benefit in that case. But really, it's about having a plan to get to us as quickly as possible when the call does come. So if you are going far, then let us know for sure. And this way, when we do give you a call, we have an idea of where you are.
Okay.
Does that help?
Right. How long do you have to be clear of a fever or COVID to be considered for the transplant if you receive the call?
Okay. So fever, I would think probably a couple of days. We'd want you to have, be fever free for at least a couple of days. If you were COVID positive, let's say I called you now and you said I was COVID positive last week, it's going to be a couple of weeks before you can come back or we'll transplant you. We are considering now, if you're COVID positive but asymptomatic, where you don't have any symptoms, but you happen to test COVID positive, we're looking at potentially not excluding you. If you're asymptomatic, we might still transplant you. But that's something that's kind of in the works. As time goes by, we're getting more and more data and more knowledge about COVID, its effects on the kidneys, its effects on the donors. Now, that's and I'm glad you actually asked that question, because it's something I forgot to bring up. Your donor could be COVID positive. So we've done well over 100 kidney transplants where the donor was COVID positive. There have been no detrimental effects whatsoever on the recipient or the kidney if the donor was COVID positive. Now, usually those COVID positive donors are also asymptomatic. If you came into the hospital and you died because of COVID, we're probably going to be really conservative and not take that kidney, that liver, whatever the case may be. But if the donor just happened to be COVID positive and they died from a car accident and they were asymptomatic when you talk to their family, they weren't showing any signs of COVID, then we'll still take that. We'll still potentially take that. Okay. So as we learn, we'll keep adjusting as time goes by. But if you were to come in, if you had no symptoms, if I said you have COVID-like symptoms and you said no, and you came into the hospital and you tested COVID positive and you still had no symptoms, there's a chance we'd still take you to transplant. But if you were symptomatic, if you had chest pain and fever and the COVID, then we wouldn't transplant you.
Okay. All right. We have a dog with us. So we were told to drop off husband and then I go check into the hotel and come back. So if I drop him at the ER, do I go back to the ER also after dropping the dog at the hotel, I'm guessing?
Probably the best bet. Let's see. We haven't done this, so we were told to drop off the husband, and then I go check in the hotel.
And come back. I believe she's going to drop the dog and check into the hotel.
So that's going to drop the husband off. The husband is the one getting the transplant?
The husband is getting the transplant, it appears.
Yeah. Yes, I would do that. I would do that. Drop him off. Are you planning on staying in the hotel with the dog, right? So I would assume drop the husband off and then come back. So I drop him off the ER. Do I go back to the ER also?
After dropping the dog? Or does she?
After dropping the dog off. By the time you drop off the dog in the hotel, at the hotel, and then come back to the ER, he might be up on the floor. He might not be, but he might be. So then you're going to go back into the ER and you're going to go, oh, where's my husband? And now you're going to have to go try and find him. So logistically, that could be potentially difficult. So if you're planning on, if the dog is able to be left alone, then maybe you leave the dog alone and you go into the ER with your husband, at least get him checked in, find out what room he gets sent to, and then you can kind of go back to the room. Most of the time, and you guys all probably know this, you always remember a question after the person leaves the room or after they get off the phone, or if you didn't understand somebody, you always think of it after they're already gone. So it definitely helps. If a transplant recipient is by themselves, they're only going to be able to absorb so much information. You were excited, you were nervous, you were anxious. Everything that the people are telling you, you're only going to be able to remember so much. So to have somebody else next to you during that process of what's being explained is super beneficial. So the more time you can spend, if you're their caregiver, the more time you can spend with them in the hospital, whether it's the ER or the room, the better.
All right, next question. I received notice from Mayo last year that I had a living donor match, but I did not make the list until this month. Do I still have this living donor?
That's a great question. I definitely am going to defer that to either your pre-transplant coordinator or the living donor coordinator. Yes.
Okay. All right. If you get the call and you just had a vaccination, does that cancel you out for an offer?
That's a great question. I guess it would depend on the vaccination. Not an ID expert, kind of know like what we know. If it was just like a COVID booster, I would say no, that wouldn't cancel out your offer. If it was, yeah, I don't know. In that case, like if I called you, Daryl, and you had told me that, then I would call the nephrologist on call and I would ask them right then and there, this is the vaccination this recipient just got. Is it still okay for me to call them in? They'll tell me yes or no, and then I'll call you back.
All right. And the last question, Joy, I see your question. I've lost the weight they wanted me to lose. What would it take for me to get back on the list? I'm going to suggest that you reach out to your RN coordinator to follow up with them to see if there are any other pending statuses and update them on your weight loss.
Yeah, if you've done it,
send them a portal. Yeah,
let them know.
Let them know. Send a portal message, or you can call the RN coordinator. Okay.
Yep.
Right. If that is all of
hopefully
your
that
questions.
helped everybody. I hope to wake you up or call you during the day or whatever, because that's a good reason to get a call.
All right. I want to thank Tommy again for this presentation. This was very insightful. Like, this was awesome. Answered tons of questions that I get during my social work assessment with patients. So this is awesome. Thank you. And thank everybody for attending. And you all have a great day.
Right on. Thanks, Lakay. See you later.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you.